There is a fan somewhere right now who has followed his national team his whole life. He grew up watching his country qualify, fail, qualify again. He knows every player in the squad by name, not just the starting 11, but the ones on the bench, the young ones who might get 5 minutes in a group game if the result is already settled. Football has been in the background of his entire adult life. His kids grew up watching it with him. His father watched it before him. He had a ticket for the World Cup. He bought it months ago. And last week, he decided he's not going. Not because the football doesn't matter to him, not because he stopped caring, but because something has quietly changed about what it would feel like to walk through a U.S. border crossing with a foreign passport, find his seat in a stadium in a city he's never been to, and try to feel the joy he's always associated with this tournament. That feeling, that quiet, personal decision made by an ordinary football fan, is the story that isn't getting told loudly enough right now. Not the ticket prices, though those are real. Not the hotel numbers, though those matter too. But the human story underneath all of it. The story of what this tournament was supposed to feel like, and what it actually feels like to the people who were supposed to show up. If you value this kind of football conversation, the kind that goes deeper than the scoreline, stay with this channel. It's what we're here for. So let's talk honestly about what's happening. Not as a crisis, not as a scandal, just as the truth. The 2026 World Cup was built on a specific promise. When the bid was won back in 2018, the vision was clear. 3 countries, 3 football cultures, 48 nations. The most inclusive, most accessible, most globally representative tournament the sport had ever staged. FIFA's own slogan, "Football Unites the World," was not just a marketing phrase. It was meant to describe what this edition would actually deliver. That promise is under pressure, and the part of the pressure that isn't being talked about clearly enough is this. Some of the fans who love this game most deeply are the ones finding it hardest to attend. Think about what football at a World Cup actually looks like from the outside. It's not just the 90 minutes inside the stadium. It's the streets before the game, the fan zones where people who can't afford a ticket watch together on enormous screens, shoulder to shoulder with strangers who don't speak the same language. It's the moment when a Mexican fan and a Moroccan fan discover they're both nervous about the same match and laugh together and feel, just briefly, that the world is smaller and kinder than the news suggests. That texture is not accidental. It is built by the fans who travel, the ones who come from far away, who save up for years, who wear their country's colors from the moment they land and keep them on until they go home. And right now, some of those fans are being told quietly, through a combination of cost and circumstance, that this tournament was not quite made for them. Here's the detail that matters most, and the one that has received the least attention in the mainstream football conversation. 4 of the 48 qualified nations have fans who cannot legally travel to the United States to watch their teams. Not because they chose not to come, but because they are subject to travel restrictions that make entry to the U.S. impossible or deeply uncertain for citizens of Côte d'Ivoire, Haiti, Iran, and Senegal. Read that again. 4 qualified nations. Fans who watched their countries earn the right to be at this World Cup, who celebrated qualifying nights, who dreamed of the tournament for years, and who now face the reality that the host country will not let them in. Côte d'Ivoire are among the most exciting teams in Africa. They won the Africa Cup of Nations in 2024. Their fans are passionate, colorful, and vocal. Senegal are ranked among the strongest squads on the continent. Their supporters have become an iconic presence at any tournament they attend. Those supporters will watch this World Cup from their living rooms, not by choice. And here's the part that should give every football fan a pause. FIFA's own human rights framework, the guidelines the organization embedded in the 2026 bid process for the first time in World Cup history, explicitly commits host nations to ensuring equal, safe, and welcoming access for all fans. That commitment, on paper, has not been met for the fans of these 4 nations. Human Rights Watch wrote to FIFA President Infantino in January asking what steps the organization would take. FIFA did not reply in writing. Amnesty International published a report in late March describing what it called significant risks to fans, players, journalists, workers, and communities across the host countries. The ACLU joined a coalition of organizations issuing a travel advisory for fans attending matches in the 11 American host cities. FIFA's public response has been, essentially, that the football will go on, which is true, but it's not quite the same thing as answering the question. Now, here is where the story becomes about something deeper than logistics, because this isn't just about fans from abroad.
It's about the communities who already live in those 11 American host cities. The World Cup was awarded to a country where millions of people from football-loving cultures have built their lives. In Los Angeles, in Houston, in Miami, in New York, in Dallas. The immigrant communities who know this sport most intimately, who have passed it down through generations, who gather every 4 years around a television or a bar or a public square to watch their home country compete. Those communities are watching this tournament come to their doorstep with something more complicated than joy. Human Rights Watch analyzed data from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and found that from January 2025 through March 2026, ICE made at least 167,000 arrests in and around the 11 American host cities. That is the backdrop against which families in those communities are trying to decide whether it is safe to attend a match, walk into a fan zone, or simply gather in public to celebrate their national team. The Miami World Cup Host Committee chairman told reporters this month that he had personally spoken with the Secretary of State and been assured that ICE would not be present at stadium venues. Immigrant advocacy groups in Florida responded by saying that a verbal assurance is not a formal commitment, and that without a written federal moratorium on enforcement activity near World Cup venues, the fear does not go away with a promise. As of this week, NBC News reported that no formal guidance has gone out inside the relevant agencies, instructing officers to steer clear of World Cup sites. What this creates, and this is the part that football tends not to discuss because it doesn't show up in a match report, is a tournament where some of the most passionate supporters of some of the most watched teams in this competition are weighing whether watching their country play in person is worth the risk. Not the financial risk, the personal risk. That is a sentence that should not exist in the same paragraph as a World Cup. And then there is the broadcast story, which is almost too strange to believe. China and India together account for nearly 3 billion people, more than a third of the population of the planet. During the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, China alone accounted for almost 50% of all viewing hours on digital and social platforms globally. Nearly half of all online consumption of that tournament came from one country. With 4 weeks to go before kickoff, neither China nor India has a confirmed broadcast deal for the 2026 World Cup. FIFA has finalized agreements in 175 countries. China and India are not among them. The reason, as best as can be established from public reporting, is a disagreement over price. FIFA reportedly sought around $100 million from India's broadcasting consortium. The consortium offered $20 million. No middle ground has been found. In China, state broadcaster CCTV, which has covered every World Cup for decades, has reportedly been quoted figures between $120 million and $300 million. A substantial gap remains. Chinese sports journalists who would normally be credentialed to cover the tournament have been unable to obtain visas, meaning that even if a deal were reached today, the infrastructure for high-quality broadcasting coverage would not be in place. What this means practically is that when the opening ceremony happens at the Banorte Stadium in Mexico City on June 11th, somewhere between 2 and 3 billion potential viewers may have no legal, paid-for way to watch it. Think about what that number means for football. Not commercially, though commercially it is significant, but for the sport itself. The World Cup has always been the moment when football reminds the world that it truly is universal, when the same 90 minutes is being watched simultaneously in Sao Paulo and Lagos and Jakarta and Leeds. The shared moment, the collective experience, that's what a World Cup is. And right now, the two most populous countries on Earth are in a negotiating dispute with FIFA that may leave their fans watching pirated streams or not watching at all.
What does this all feel like for the players? Because the players are the ones who will walk into those stadiums, regardless of who is or isn't in the stands. Imagine being a player from Senegal. You've qualified. You've worked your whole career for this. You know what this means to your country, to your family, to the people back home who stayed up through the night to watch your qualifying matches. And you know that when you walk out onto that pitch in one of those American cities, the sea of green and yellow and red that would have filled a section of the ground, the noise and the color and the belonging, will be absent. Players notice that. Any footballer who has played in a home game and an away game knows the difference that a crowd makes. Not just the volume of it, but the feeling of being held by it. The sense that the people in those seats carried something with them into the stadium, years of hope and love for a team, and that you, as a player, are the temporary vessel for all of it. Some of those players will be running out into a partial silence where there should have been a full roar, and they'll know why, and they'll play anyway, because that's what footballers do. But it will be there, in the background, a quiet absence where something should have been. So, where does this all leave us, honestly, as we get to the final stretch? The football is going to happen. The matches will be played. Some of them will be extraordinary. There will be goals that people talk about for decades. There will be upsets that nobody predicted. There will be a team somewhere in this competition that plays far beyond what anyone expected and captures the imagination of the world in the way that only a World Cup can produce. That is as certain as anything in football can be. But the question this tournament is quietly asking, the one that nobody at FIFA seems willing to answer directly, is what kind of World Cup it is going to be. Whether the gap between the promise and the reality will be visible in the stands, in the fan zones, in the community surrounding those 11 American cities. Whether the people for whom football is not an entertainment option but a cultural heartbeat will feel that this tournament belonged to them. There's a version of 2026 where the football is brilliant enough to make all of this noise seem small. History suggests that's exactly what happens when the ball starts rolling. The world forgets the argument and watches the game. But there's another version, one where years from now, people look back at this particular World Cup and remember it as the tournament that had everything: 48 teams, 104 matches, the biggest stadiums, the highest prize money, and still somehow felt like it was missing something. Like a party where all the logistics were perfect, but the wrong guests were in the room. The fans who couldn't come, the communities who were afraid to gather, the billions who couldn't watch. They didn't leave because they stopped caring about football. They were kept away by things that had nothing to do with the game. And I think that matters. Not because it changes the result of a single match, but because the World Cup has always been about more than results. It has always been about the reminder that football belongs to everyone. Whether 2026 lives up to that genuinely, not just in the slogan, is the question that will define how this tournament is remembered. I'd really like to know what you think. Not about the football, we'll get to that once the games begin, but about this, about what a World Cup is actually for. Leave it in the comments. These conversations are worth having. If this is the kind of football storytelling you come here for, a like helps more people find it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one.